Yeah, so I'm Amanda Kirk. I'm the chair here at the IGDA Albany. I've been in the game industry for around 10 years now. I'm currently working up at RPI as a digital game hub coordinator. So my position is serving a grant that has been given by New York State to try to improve game development in our region. So today I'm talking about project planning. This kind of came as something that was really important to share because through the work that I've been doing up at RPI, I see that a lot of the students really enjoy and are really passionate about what they're building games and creating different game ideas, but they may not necessarily understand how to actually take a core concept or like a basic idea and actually get that out the door. And to me, this is really something that's important to have a skill in because it allows you to kind of, you can develop your ideas and you can get them out where people can see them. And it also, by being able to plan your ideas, you're able to achieve whatever goals it is that you're trying to achieve, and save yourself time and headaches and end up with a really good project. So I'm a game designer by trade. I've done a lot of different game design work from the concept phase all the way through to shipping. I worked at a very small studio, mostly worked for hire. So a lot of the stuff that we were doing, I would have to be responsible for every component of the design. And also on top of that, later on, I was also involved with producing the games, which is the project management component. As a designer, I think that there's a lot of things that are synergistic between a design role and a production role, especially if you're really into systems design, because effectively your project becomes a system that you're designing, and then you can design your systems that are in your game within their system. So I wanted to start by talking about the GDD, which is something that I think any game design student is familiar with, and any game designer, I would imagine, would be familiar with. So this is pretty much the Bible for your game. It should contain everything about your game, is the theory. So there should always be a beginning of your game design document, which is your overview or executive overview, which would give anyone like a snapshot of what your game should be about. So it'll have the goals, like your target audience, what the game is supposed to do, like a really brief description of it, and then it will then go into every other component of the game. And then you would also have your specifications. So along with describing everything that your game would do, you would need to say, well, how many animations, if you're going to have a character running around, you have to know, how many animations it's going to have and that sort of thing. So, yes, so at the beginning, you really have to determine, before you start creating your game, what are you making? And how are you gonna, what is your purpose in making the game? So you should have an overview that kind of describes what you're building, and then you should go from there. So the example I wanted to pull out, because it's something that I've been working on personally, is this project that I've been working on that is TBD title Bees, which is a game where you are like a apiist, like you're a bee farmer, and you are planting flowers to allow your bees to create honey. And so the goal of the game as a player is to kind of, it's like a cozy game. So you're kind of, growing your little flowers into this little ecosystem that'll allow your bees to thrive. And then there would be some component where the different types of honey you make would, there's maybe a challenge, like make buckwheat honey. Then you would do that. Internally, my goal was to play with the AI features in Unity. And this is actually part of a larger idea that I have. So what I've done in this example is I've pared it down into the core mechanics. So we have my game pitch, which I kind of gave to you. We have the target audience, which is kind of anyone excited about bees, casual gamers, kind of no stress gameplay players. Target platform. So this is going to be put out on PC first, and we would like to have it on mobile because we think that would be really good on mobile. That's why we chose Unity, because it would be easier to support a variety of different cell phones on Unity versus Unreal. So the session gameplay length, which is how long you expect the player to play. So I would expect this like it's a mobile game. Maybe it's a PC game. I would say 15 minutes max if it's on PC, 3 minutes if it's on mobile. Narrative synopsis, kind of gave that. Gameplay synopsis, what you're doing in the game, key features. So you would have a list of every different thing you would have in the game, and then you'd have your risks, which are actually one of the most important things when you're developing your game plan. We'll get into that later. So this is my key features list, my overview. So you control character, you have bees, so you have different types of bees, which would be defined to the AI. You have your playable character. I thought maybe you'd have a music player, so you could go and change it to like jazz or, easy listening music, whatever you want. 100 different flowering plants, 5 environments based on growing zones, and the risks is really the AI, and then the ability to support a growing number of flowers. So we would have to design a system that would allow us to support over 100 different flowering plants. So, because this is a very small project that I'm doing along with my other work, this is a very small kind of organic project that I'm working on. So instead of defining everything in my GDD all at once, because it's just me and a programmer working on it, I went from my key concepts to this sub-goal phase. So it's really about defining what is going to be the key meat feature of the game. So, and this also helped when I was talking to my programmer, so we could figure out what this thing actually has to do. And it can also help you think, because if you haven't designed a lot of games before, there are usability issues that you're not going to think about until you actually think of like a test case. Well, how is the player going to interact with flowers? Like, how am I planting the flowers? And how do I look at the honey and make sure that it's, cool? And also, by being able to test frequently, you're able to make sure everything is still fun, and you can find things that are just going to organically grow out of what you're building. And it looks pretty cool. So I separated these things into these different test cases. And so it's kind of like our project roadmap. Again, this is a very small project, and we're not very... we're trying to get something done more so than, create a AAA product. All right. Oh no, building out the game. Because I have notes, but I don't have them up. So scope is really important. Don't throw the scope out the window. So when you develop your key features, right? That's really what your main game plan should be. And then you can design like what your key milestones will be based on those key features. And so the big concern here is as soon as you start working on your project, it's gonna take longer than you expect, and especially if you don't plan. So by being able to take time and in advance figure out, so programmer could have gone off and done all those crazy things without me, and we could have planned this ecosystem that's going to have 5 different biomes and all of these flowers, and so there we kind of take a step back and figure out, well, how are we actually going to do this, and how do you manage sub goals, right? Because this is a very small example, but if you're doing a really large project, how do you make it so that you feel that you are creating actionable goals? In Scrum, right, they have very small sprints that you're planning and doing, and it's very similar. I mean, it's project planning, so it's effectively the same thing. So you want to make sure that you're planning out like integral chunks that you can check back to and say, oh yes, I did this. And then you can also think back, well, if your core goal is just to have a nice, calm experience with, growing flowers and having bees, if your bee AI is like having serious issues where it's like attacking each other or something, and then you're going to figure out, well, if the bees get too close to each other, they're going to fight, then like that's out of scope. Cut it. You don't need a bee combat system because there's no combat, and like it's not a key component of the game. And if someone said, oh, it would be really cool if they fought, well, maybe it would be cool, but we don't have time for that. So the next step that we went through is planning out our goals using Team Gantt, which is free-ish. I think if after a certain number of people, you have to pay for it. But it's a really free, easy-to-use, web-based tool for project planning. So we're using this, and we're using Toggle. The thing to keep in mind when you're doing any project, really, is that you're going to want to scope out your estimates, how long you think something is going to take, especially if you're working on a team, so people can manage expectations on when something will be done. And if you're able to track even what you're doing right now, even if you think, oh, well, it's not going to matter, or it's a small project, it's not very serious, or whatever, this way you can actually track how long it'll take you, and then your estimates will get better, so that when you're working at any software product, you know how long it's going to take you to do something, and then you can, kind of grow around that. So Team Gantt is what we chose because it was free, easy to use, and yes. So these are other options. There's tons. You should use whatever works best for you, because I'm sorry, I understand that a lot of people don't like planning projects. It's probably like the boring part. You want to actually get into working on it. So there's Asana, which is the oldest one that is represented here. That's a really good project management system. Perforce is by Handsoft, and that one is really popular right now. And then Atlassian, they do Jira, which is a bug tracking system, and their project management system is called Confluence. I don't have any experience with it. I assume it's good enough. I mean, if you like Jira, you probably would like it. I don't mind Jira. So we had discussed using one of these products because these are what game industry experts use. They use Perforce typically. The other ones would at least be good on a resume. And I think that's what you have to think about when you're working on a side project is it going to be something that's going to be getting you money? Or is it going to be something that's going to help you get a job? And like what kind of platforms and what kind of decisions you make can impact that kind of thing. So if you're thinking that you want to get a job in the industry, I would definitely, look at doing one of these if you have time. We just didn't, because we didn't have the, we didn't really want to afford the time to put into learning these systems in advance, and we just wanted to kind of hit the ground running. Yeah. So there's, again, other options. This is a beautiful example of a game that I invented to make this chart. It is a platforming game that has a mini game component. So maybe be jumping around, and then you would get to a door and you have to solve a locked door puzzle. So in this case, and this is just using Google Sheets, you can use Excel. This case here, we have a designer, a coder, and an artist. Maybe they're the same people. It doesn't matter. It's just dividing the tasks into separate chunks. The way I would think of this is if you already have your game design all fleshed out and you know everything that you want to do, you would then sit down and figure out, well, how long is this thing going to take me to do? And then you would plan a basic schedule. Like we want to have the minigame and the core system in by, what day we have here? By the end of September. And then from there, you would then plot out, well, how would you fit that in? So one thing to keep in mind is that if you are designing a game that has a lot of iterative flexibility in it, so you're going to design a platformer that has a bunch of like physical hazards like spikes or plant traps. Nothing with AI in this case because I was trying to be simple. You might say, well, we're going to have 6 different challenges that they're going to have to overcome, but maybe we didn't design exactly what these 6 challenges would be. So in the case we have these light yellow and then the dark orange. the light yellow is supposed to represent planning processes, and then the orange is the implementation of the thing. Same thing with the light pink and the like purpley color. So you could effectively, in a month, develop like a very small vertical slice if you were able to actually talk to the people that you're working with and develop a plan where they would build off each other, kind of like an assembly line. So that's one way you can plan a project. So the next step, once you have gotten to the point where you can actually plan out your schedule based on days or tasks, which I guess is the other thing to think about. In our case, we're not developing to a set schedule. If you're developing something for a class or for like a contract, you would have specified, by this date we promise we will have this chunk done. Versus in our case, it's like these are things we would like to have done, and we've stipulated these are the goals we have, but they'll get done when they get done. So in this case, after reviewing everything, I was thinking about how we were going to have the 100 plants in the game and all these biomes, and I started plotting out like example data sets for these beautiful plants. That's a butterfly weed, I think, that's the orange one. And what I decided is that that's not important, right? I'm trying to develop a game where I get to learn about AI and Unity, and my player is trying to make a game where they're playing a game where it's cool, casual, and they get to make flower environments where bees are happy. So it doesn't actually matter if it's a real New York State plant, maybe later, but for now, I want to focus on the fun, and I want to focus on what's going to be meaningful for the player and what's going to be meaningful for me. So from there, I went and decided that we were going to have cute pun named bee flowers. So instead of having bee bomb, it was bee da bomb or something. They're, again, work in progress. And then the other thing too is, for me, it was important to have something visually presentable on screen, and I'm not an artist, so I used, this is Mixamo, I think, or no, Magic of Voxel, to create things. Yeah, so we have a player, he can move around, there's bees, they know how to go to flowers and pick up honey. The thing for me was making sure it also was visually representative of something, instead of just being a cube and a cylinder. So we have these flowers and the fence, and the background is just a bitmap that I made because I'm an awesome artist. Yeah, so that's where we got pretty much was a playable prototype of the game. You can press play and it functions, but it's not really engaging yet for the player. The next step moving forward would be to make sure the bees were collecting pollen that they could bring to the hive, and then add player interactions. So I have some wireframes. Unfortunately, I forgot to add them to the slide deck, but I have some wireframes that I've built out so that we could start developing that. And it's kind of something that we wanted to get done by the end of the year, but I don't know if we will, just because we're both really busy right now. So once you have your game projects well developed, either like a vertical slice, so it's ready for someone to have some sort of impression on it, or if you're getting ready to like ship the game, you'll want to think about how you're going to track your bugs and features. So as soon as you put your game in front of someone, they're going to start playing it, and if you get the right target audience, they're going to give you comments like it would be better if they had if the character wasn't all this like statue guy, or it would be better if there was more feedback, or I was confused, like why were they confused. So you definitely want to test as much as you can with the game, because the more testing you get in, the more you'll be able to implement feedback that'll make your game better. You'll want to record, it'll be good for recording metrics. So if you are trying to determine like, is it relaxed enough, you can track it over time. What makes it feel relaxed? Can you tweak things that make it give a better feeling? And then if you change it, do you get a reaction, or is it just the same? So you can compile that data. If you're working with clients, compiling data is really important, because it allows you to use that as a test bed. Like, you can refer to that information when you're making decisions. A lot of times when you're working with a larger company, or if you're working on something that's going to be, very important, it's good to know that you have tested the information, and that it's going to, that the decisions that you're making are informed based on actual players. And then make your adjustments and then retest. And I think for testers, there's 2 different types of testing that you're going to be doing. Well, 3, I guess. One is you're going to be doing play testing. So you're going to take players that are actually going to be interested in playing the game that you're making. And you want to see how they play the game without any previous experience. And you don't want to really tell them anything about the experience. You want to let them guide you, and you want to watch them and take ample notes on everything that they're doing. They'll find issues that you may not have seen, and they'll also have important feedback, like would they buy the game. You'll have internal testing, so like your team, you should set up times where your whole team can get together and play the game. And this is kind of more of a critique style review, where you should look at every screen in the game and say, well, what can we do to make it 10% better? Because that's the kind of, if you're trying to make a game that is going to be like competitive with a lot of titles on the indie market, they have to have a really high amount of polish so that people will be grabbed in from the first second that they play the game. And then the third type is like quality assurance testing, so making sure that it's functionally sound, that there's no bugs, errors, defects with the thing that you're building. That's really important, and to me, it's important to test as early as feasibly possible. So pretty much once you have all of your features in, you can do a rigorous test, but you should still be testing even prior to that, even if it's just internally, to make sure that there's nothing that is like horribly defective, because that is what will end up taking a lot of time when you're making the game, and no one wants to spend time dealing with nightmare problems all at the end. Yep. So when you're planning the game, things will go awry. So you've created everything, you think that everything's going great, you have a great estimate, you have a great, project plan going, and then there will always be the unavoidable problems. That's why it's important to have risk assessment in your GDD, so you know where your risks are, you tackle those early, and you know that those are the challenges you're going to have. When you're going through, it's important to always test, like look back at your plan and make sure you're achieving those goals and that you're still in line with what you started with. And if you aren't, you can always address it, but like adjust your design so it's updated with what you're currently doing. But you need to make sure that you at least have the conversation when things start going off the beaten path, because these bad things can happen. So you can have the issue where your estimate is entirely wrong. You have a feature of your game and you thought it was going to take you 3 days. Ha! Turns out it's going to take 3 weeks. Well, why? So why is it going to take 3 weeks, and what can you do about it? So there are different things you can do, and if you're able to plan, so first of all, if that is something that would happen, that is something that you would hopefully have decided would be a risky piece of work that you're doing. So that's something you would have done early on in the plan, so that it's easier to mitigate that issue, because you could plan things later on. Either you'll cut it or it'll be simpler, smaller. And that's the thing too, is if this thing is going to take 3 weeks, well, do you really need it? And is there a way you could do it cheaper, easier? So that's something that's important. And estimates go wrong all the time, and it's just a part of the development process, and it's not really a failure. I mean, it's a failure, but it should be considered more a learning experience than anything else. A teammate leaves, so you have like this awesome groove going on with your, 2 programmers, artists. You're just kind of hanging out, doing this cool game by yourself. Turns out one of them, has a life emergency come up and they have to leave. What do you do? So in those cases, you have to decide, is there work? Do you need to find someone else who can do it? Can you manage to scrape by without, one more member? Or do you augment your game to allow you to meet your base goals without having that specialty? And then you can't find the appropriate teammate, so this is kind of similar, where you really want to make this awesome game that has like this awesome audio track and you can't find anyone that can just do exactly what you want to do, well then, do you learn it yourself? Do you put the project on hold? That kind of thing. Game isn't fun, so you're testing it and no one likes your game. Oh no. So in that case, it's sad. You have to consider whether or not you should abandon it, which is sad. No one wants to abandon a game, but it's certainly something where if it's going to cost you not just time, but also you have to figure out what your mental state is when you find out that your game is just a total disaster. You know, are you going to just stop working on it, which is, a decision. It's a hard decision, but you may have to make that. Or is there something specific that's not fun about it? And how can you change your current plan so that it could be more fun? Is it so you would kind of have more playtesters play it, and you would kind of take a step back from what your plan was and put your plan on hold and try to go back to what your goals were and go back to who your target audience is and figure out, why isn't this working, and then fix it, and it could be successful. Key stakeholder wants a significant change. This is for if you're working for a client, or if you're working in a large studio and there's someone who is important and they've decided that, we can't use half of these assets because they just won't work anymore. And it's like, well, terrific. What are you going to do? You can't really tell them, no, we're not going to change it, because they're the ones they've already made the decision. This thing, whatever the change is, has to be made. And if you decide to say no, then realistically, that's not an answer that you can give them, right? Either they're going to be like, well then, if you don't change it, we're not paying you. Or if you don't change it, you're going to be in trouble. Why won't you listen to me? You don't, care about what I'm saying. We really need this feature. And it doesn't matter what the feature is. They're just really like, this has to be in there. And in those cases, what's really important is to listen to what those people are saying, because it's not necessarily what they are telling you to do that's important. It's why they're telling you to do it. And in those cases, there's some things that are unavoidable and they must change. And then you have to work with, so you want to always come at it very open-minded, right? Because, okay, we have to make this change, but what does that mean for the rest of the project? Because that will impact everything. Does that mean that we're cutting other features? Does that mean that you're going to pay us more money if it's a client because we agreed that we would do this and this is more work? You want this whole new feature. Or if they're cutting something and you don't want to cut it, well, why are they cutting it? And so that's kind of the thing that you work through. And if you have a plan, if you have everything all, costed out, like how long it's going to take for you to finish your project, how long it's going to take to implement this new feature, then you can actually have a constructive conversation about how to actually achieve a situation where your goals and their goals are aligned. So that's all I had to say. I don't know how we are on time, but if anyone has questions. So she was asking about how do I track playtesting feedback and bugs, and if I use the Gantt chart. This is actually my first time using the Gantt chart, so don't know what I would do. So when I'm collecting data, typically I just have my own handwritten notes because I find that's the fastest way to get the data initially, and then I convert that into an Excel spreadsheet, which previously I would put into Bugzilla, which is an open source bug tracking system, which is pretty awesome. And I don't know how hard it is to get set up, unfortunately, but it is really flexible. And in those cases, you can, with Bugzilla, it's really simple to tag things as you can sort them by whatever you want, like components. So you could even sort them as this is a feature, this is a request. If you're looking at Jira, we've done it before where anything P5 was considered a feature request. And I think Jira, again, I think you have to pay for that. So I guess that's what I do a lot of times. If we don't have the bug system set up yet, I would just work straight from Excel or Google Sheets, and that way you can track, it's fairly easy to track all the different things that you would need there, right? Like who you're assigning it to. And a lot of times when we would get information back from the clients, we did a lot of licensed titles. So it could be something, it's just like a laundry list of things that are wrong with the game. Like her, hair is 2 pixels too high, or, whatever. And so some of the things are really easy to fix, and some of the things can be really hard. Like, we want all these things replaced with all these other things, or we need this, she can't jump that way. And it's like, well, she needs to, or else the game won't play right. And in those cases, we would take the sheet that they would give us, which is normally their form, and we would turn it into an Excel sheet and work together as a team and figure out, what was easy to do and what was more challenging to do. And then we would get on a call with them, talk about what would make that work best. So yeah, I mean, the spreadsheet really will accomplish anything that you really need it to do. The bug system is good for larger teams when you're tracking lots of different metrics. The question was, how do you deal with training people to use project planning tools when they are resistant to doing so? Or if they are, especially. Because, I mean, step one is just find people who like planning and are appreciating all these spreadsheets. How do you onboard someone who is new to the team? I think this is actually really good at onboarding people, right? Because then they can look at your GDD and look at your plans, and they can go from there and kind of learn about what they're going to be doing with a whole picture of what they can do. A lot of times, I guess, so there's different people, and they have different ways of integrating into new projects. So some people will be super excited that there's all this information here, but then other people are going to be like scared because, whoa, this is way too much information. And a lot of times what we would do is we'd have a wiki that would have kind of a TLDR version of everything you need to know. And actually for our Bees project, I have a Word document that has kind of a how-to guide, like this is where toggle is, this is where the Gantt chart is, this is where the project plan is. And so from there, someone who didn't know where everything is would know, and you would have kind of like a blurb at the top if I was running this as like a real project, where it would be like, this is the thing. But I think the key component when you're dealing with this amount of information and you're onboarding someone is to have someone that they're working with. Either they're going to shadow for a few days, or they're going to be like someone's buddy. Like there's going to be somebody checking in with them frequently and making them understand that they should know to ask people questions when they're confused or when they have any input, because that's really important to the development process, is making sure that all of your teammates feel invested in the project that they're working on, and that they're invested in also the ecosystem that they're in. If there's people who are really hesitant to, take on these project planning tasks, there's definitely ways to try to get them to engage more with the system. Like for example, when, this. So in this case, it looks like I did put all this stuff in, right? But if I was on a team with 3 or 4 different people, I would actually make the coder go in here and put this information in here. And I would definitely hold them accountable when we're writing the GDD and be like, so how long is this going to take? And are you excited about doing this? And what else do you want to put in here? Because if they're not invested at the beginning, and if they don't have ownership over these answers, then they're going to go over, and I'm a designer, and so often the issues come up as the programmers. I'm not blaming programmers for everything. I don't have design issues because I'm the designer. My artists in the past, no, I have problems with artists too. They go over budget. It's sad. Because no one likes going over budget. So yeah, it's really just making sure people have ownership over these things. I think it's easier to talk to artists about these problems because art is visual, so it's easier, either the thing exists or it doesn't, and we have some understanding of how long it'll take to make one, whereas with programming, there can be dark holes that people can fall down and then things go awry. And a lot of times they like blaming that they didn't have any part in this. So trying to get them into this process and get them excited about it is important. I think it's a lot easier to get engineers excited at the like QA phase, where there's lots of bugs that people can squish and we can talk about like lovely technical problems. Whereas in the project planning phase, they really just want to get into the code, and the challenge is getting them to wait and plan it and figure out, a lot of times we'll write technical design documents alongside the game design documents. So I'll specify that it's a balloon blowing minigame that uses the microphone. So I exhale and it picks up my mic settings and then it'll inflate the balloon. I don't care how the balloon inflates. So if the artists and the programmers want to go and make it do it this way or that way, doesn't bother me. But they should probably specify, especially if you're working in a large project where there's going to be a lot of different programmers coming in, you want them all to know how the thing is going to be planned, because you should be working together, because by cooperating, you're able to make a better, more solid product, and you can learn from each other, and it'll be a better product in the end. The other thing to do is assign the person who never fills out the chart the task of running the chart. Like, I am going to talk, so someone has to fill out the form while I'm talking, and just happens to be the person that never fills out the stuff. Because a lot of times, I mean, let's be real, a lot of times people aren't doing it necessarily because they don't, like, oh, this is gross and disgusting and I hate it. No, it's because they're not comfortable doing it. It's not something that they have in their regular habit. So if you set it up as a habit, and if you set it up as it's no big deal, like, whatever, it's not a big deal. Questions? Comments? Thank you.